Olber's paradox. Look up at the night sky. It's filled with stars, but there's so much darkness between them. Have you ever wondered why? If the universe is infinite and filled with stars, shouldn't the sky be blazing with light, with no room for darkness? This is Olber's paradox, a mystery that has puzzled scientists and philosophers for centuries. It's a question that seems simple but leads to profound insights about the nature of the universe, its age, and its structure. The paradox is named after Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers, a 19th-century German astronomer who popularized the idea, though versions of it had been discussed earlier. At its core, the paradox asks this: if the universe is infinite, eternal, and uniformly filled with stars, then every line of sight should eventually land on the surface of a star. This would mean that the entire night sky should glow as brightly as the surface of the sun. But instead, we see vast stretches of darkness. Why? To understand why this is such a puzzle, imagine standing in a dense forest. No matter which direction you look, your line of sight eventually lands on a tree trunk. In an infinite universe filled with stars, the same logic should apply. Every direction should lead to the surface of a star. Yet the night sky is mostly dark. This contradiction between theory and observation is what makes Olber's paradox so fascinating. For centuries, scientists proposed different explanations. One idea was that dust and gas in space might block the light from distant stars, preventing it from reaching us. But this doesn't work. Over time, interstellar dust would heat up and begin to glow, filling the sky with light anyway. Another suggestion was that the stars might simply be too far away, with their light dimming as it traveled across vast distances. But in an infinite universe, the number of stars increases without limit, meaning their combined light should overcome any dimming. These early attempts to solve the paradox only deepened the mystery. The breakthrough came in the 20th century with the discovery that the universe is neither infinite nor eternal in the way previously imagined. Instead, it has a finite age, around 13.8 billion years, and it's expanding. These two facts are key to resolving Olber's paradox. First, let's consider the universe's age. If the universe is 13.8 billion years old, then light from stars more than 13.8 billion light-years away hasn't had enough time to reach us. The finite age of the universe limits the number of stars we can see, creating gaps of darkness in the sky. In other words, the observable universe is not infinite, it's bounded by the speed of light and the universe's age. Second, the universe's expansion plays a crucial role. As the universe expands, the light from distant stars and galaxies is stretched into longer wavelengths, a phenomenon known as redshift. This stretching moves the light out of the visible spectrum, making it invisible to the human eye. What we perceive as darkness is often light that has shifted into infrared or radio wavelengths. These two insights, the finite age of the universe and its expansion, transform Olber's paradox from a mystery into a powerful tool for understanding the cosmos. They reveal that the dark night sky is not a flaw in the universe's design but a window into its history and structure. But the paradox doesn't end there. It also raises deeper philosophical and existential questions. The darkness of the night sky reminds us that the universe is vast, and much of it lies beyond our ability to perceive. It's a humbling realization, forcing us to confront the limits of human knowledge and the scale of the cosmos. Interestingly, what we do see when we look at the night sky is evidence of the universe's origins. The faint glow of the cosmic microwave background radiation, remnants of the Big Bang, fills the sky, even in its darkest parts. This background radiation is a direct result of the universe's finite age and expansion, providing a subtle but profound answer to Olber's paradox. It's a reminder that the darkness we see isn't empty, it's filled with the story of the universe's birth and evolution. Olber's paradox also highlights the interconnectedness of science. Solving it required insights from astronomy, physics, and cosmology, showing how different fields come together to answer fundamental questions. It's a testament to the power of human curiosity and our ability to piece together the mysteries of the universe. So what does Olber's paradox teach us? First, it reminds us to question our assumptions. The idea of an infinite, eternal universe seemed intuitive for centuries, but closer examination revealed its flaws. Second, it shows us the value of looking beyond the surface. The darkness of the night sky isn't just absence, it's evidence of the universe's dynamic history. And finally, it inspires us to keep exploring, to push the boundaries of what we know, and to embrace the wonder of the unknown. In the end, Olber's paradox is more than just a question about the night sky. It's a journey into the nature of existence itself, challenging us to think deeply about the universe and our place within it. So the next time you look up and see the darkness between the stars, remember, that darkness is not just the absence of light, it's a doorway to understanding the cosmos. Dichotomy paradox. To reach the other side, you must first cover half the distance. Then, to cover the remaining half, you have to travel half of that distance, and then half of that, and so on. Suddenly, you're trapped in an infinite series of steps, each smaller than the last. If you can't complete an infinite number of tasks, how can you ever reach the other side? Welcome to the dichotomy paradox, one of the most famous thought experiments introduced by the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea. At first glance, the paradox seems absurd. Of course, we can cross the room, we do it every day without a second thought. But the dichotomy paradox challenges us to think more deeply about the nature of motion, infinity, and how we understand the passage of time in space. Zeno's paradox has fascinated thinkers for centuries because it asks a question that seems simple but reveals profound complexities about the way the universe works. Let's break it down. The paradox starts with the idea that to move from point A to point B, you must first reach the halfway point. But to get to the halfway point, you must first reach the quarter point, and to get there, you must reach the eighth point, and so on. This creates an infinite sequence of smaller and smaller steps that you must complete. The problem is that completing an infinite number of tasks seems impossible. If there are infinitely many steps, how can motion ever occur? How can you ever take the first step, let alone reach your destination? The paradox highlights a fascinating conflict between our everyday experience and the logical implications of dividing space and time into infinitely small parts. In reality, we have no trouble crossing rooms, walking down streets, or traveling great distances. But Zeno's paradox forces us to confront a deeper question: how do we reconcile the idea of infinite divisibility with the fact that motion clearly happens? One way to approach this is through the concept of an infinite series. Mathematically, the distances described in the paradox, half, then a quarter, then an eighth, and so on, form a convergent series. When you add up all these fractions, their sum approaches a finite number, the total distance between point A and point B. In other words, even though the series involves infinitely many terms, the total distance remains finite. This mathematical insight resolves the paradox on a practical level, showing that the infinite steps Zeno describes can indeed be completed in a finite amount of time. But Zeno's dichotomy paradox isn't just a mathematical puzzle. It also raises philosophical questions about the nature of reality. If space and time can be infinitely divided, does that mean they're made up of infinitely small parts? Or is there a fundamental limit to how far we can divide them? These questions lie at the heart of debates about the nature of the universe, from ancient philosophy to modern physics. In the 20th century, quantum mechanics and relativity added new layers to this discussion. Quantum mechanics suggests that space and time may not be infinitely divisible but instead have a smallest possible unit, known as the Planck length and Planck time. These fundamental limits challenge the idea of infinite divisibility and offer a potential resolution to Zeno's paradox on a physical level. If there's a smallest possible step, then the infinite sequence of smaller and smaller steps described in the paradox simply doesn't exist in the real world. At the same time, Einstein's theory of relativity revolutionized our understanding of space and time by showing that they're not separate entities but part of a single interconnected fabric. Motion, according to relativity, is not about objects moving through absolute space but about changes in the relationships between objects in spacetime. This perspective shifts the focus of Zeno's paradox, suggesting that motion might be better understood as a continuous process rather than a series of discrete steps. The dichotomy paradox also has implications for how we think about infinity itself. Infinity is a concept that challenges human intuition. It's not just a very large number but a fundamentally different kind of quantity. Zeno's paradox forces us to confront the idea that infinity can appear in the smallest details of motion as well as in the vastness of space and time. It reminds us that even the most ordinary experiences, like walking across a room, can contain mysteries that stretch the limits of our understanding. But perhaps the most profound lesson of the dichotomy paradox is what it reveals about the relationship between logic and reality. On a purely logical level, the paradox suggests that motion is impossible. Yet we know from experience that motion happens all the time. This tension highlights the limitations of human reasoning and the importance of testing ideas against the real world. It reminds us that while logic and mathematics are powerful tools for understanding the universe, they're not the whole story. Zeno's dichotomy paradox is more than just a thought experiment. It's a gateway to some of the deepest questions about the nature of reality, motion, and infinity. It challenges us to think critically about the assumptions we take for granted and to explore the mysteries hidden in everyday experiences. And perhaps that's why it continues to captivate us, because it shows us that even the simplest act of crossing a room can open the door to an infinite world of possibilities. Grand Hotel Paradox. In a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, every single room is occupied, yet somehow the hotel can still accommodate new guests. How is this possible? This is the Grand Hotel Paradox, a thought experiment introduced by German mathematician David Hilbert, and it's one of the most mind-bending ways to understand infinity. It challenges our intuitive understanding of numbers and space, forcing us to rethink what infinity really means. Picture the Grand Hotel. Every room has a number, 1, 2, 3, and so on, and all the rooms are filled with guests. A traveler arrives at the front desk and asks for a room. The receptionist, without hesitation, smiles and says, "Of course, we have space." But how? If every room is occupied, where will the new guest stay? Here's the trick. The receptionist asks every current guest to move to the next room. The person in room 1 moves to room 2, the person in room 2 moves to room 3, and so on. This frees up room 1, which is now available for the new guest. Remarkably, even though the hotel was full, it made space without turning anyone away. That's the strange logic of infinity, there's always room for more. But the paradox doesn't stop there. What if a bus arrives carrying an infinite number of new guests? Surely even an infinite hotel couldn't handle that, right? Yet the Grand Hotel can. This time, the receptionist asks each current guest to move to a room number that's double their current one. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2, the guest in room 2 moves to room 4, the guest in room 3 moves to room 6, and so on. This leaves all the odd-numbered rooms, an infinite number of them, empty and ready for the new arrivals. The hotel accommodates infinity within infinity, a concept that feels impossible but works perfectly within the rules of mathematics. So, what does this paradox teach us? First, it reveals that infinity is not just a really large number, it's a completely different kind of quantity. In our everyday lives, numbers are finite and behave predictably, but infinity breaks those rules. In the Grand Hotel, full doesn't mean no more room, and adding to infinity doesn't make it bigger, it's already infinite. The paradox also highlights the difference between potential infinity and actual infinity. Potential infinity is the idea of a process that could go on forever, like counting numbers. Actual infinity, on the other hand, refers to a completed infinite set, like the total number of rooms in the Grand Hotel. Hilbert's thought experiment forces us to confront the strangeness of actual infinity, where our normal understanding of addition, subtraction, and space no longer applies. But there's more. The Grand Hotel paradox also has profound implications for our understanding of the universe. In physics, for example, infinity appears in theories about the cosmos, black holes, and even the nature of time. Hilbert's paradox reminds us that infinity isn't just a mathematical curiosity, it's a concept that shapes how we understand reality itself. Yet the paradox also raises philosophical questions. If infinity behaves so differently from finite numbers, can we ever truly comprehend it? The Grand Hotel feels absurd because it conflicts with our everyday intuition. It shows us that the human mind struggles to grasp infinity, even though it's a central idea in math and science. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Grand Hotel paradox is how it applies to modern mathematics. The paradox is rooted in set theory, a branch of math that explores collections of objects. Mathematicians like Georg Cantor, who pioneered the study of infinity, showed that there are different sizes of infinity. The set of whole numbers, for example, is infinite, but it's smaller than the set of real numbers, which includes fractions and decimals. The Grand Hotel illustrates one of these infinities, known as countable infinity, where you can list all the elements in a sequence, like the rooms in the hotel. The paradox even connects to practical problems, like computer science. Algorithms that deal with infinite processes, like searching through massive data sets, often rely on principles similar to the Grand Hotel. By breaking infinite problems into manageable steps, we can apply the logic of Hilbert's Hotel to solve challenges in technology and beyond. But perhaps the most important lesson of the Grand Hotel paradox is how it challenges us to think differently. Infinity is a concept that defies common sense, but it's also a gateway to deeper understanding. It forces us to question our assumptions and explore ideas that stretch the limits of imagination. The Grand Hotel paradox may seem like a quirky mathematical puzzle, but it's a profound exploration of the nature of infinity. It shows us that the universe, and even reality itself, is far stranger and more complex than we often realize. And in the process, it reminds us that some questions don't have simple answers, but they can still open the door to endless possibilities. Schrödinger's cat paradox. Unexpected hanging paradox. A prisoner is sentenced to be hanged, but with an unusual twist. The judge announces, "You will be hanged at noon on one weekday next week, but it will be a surprise. You won't know the day of your execution until the executioner arrives." The prisoner, desperate to avoid the noose, thinks carefully and begins to analyze the situation. If the execution happens on Friday, he reasons, it won't be a surprise because if he's still alive by Thursday evening, Friday is the only day left. So, Friday is ruled out. Then, if Friday is ruled out, Thursday can't be the day either. After all, if he's alive by Wednesday night, Thursday would also be predictable. Using this same logic, the prisoner eliminates Wednesday, Tuesday, and even Monday. He concludes that the judge's statement is impossible, and he'll never be hanged. Feeling relieved, the prisoner goes to bed, confident in his reasoning. But on Wednesday at noon, the executioner arrives, and the prisoner is hanged, completely by surprise. How is this possible? This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a thought experiment that has baffled philosophers, mathematicians, and logicians for decades. It's a paradox that plays with our understanding of logic, knowledge, and self-fulfilling reasoning. At first glance, the prisoner's reasoning seems airtight. By eliminating each day as a possibility, he concludes that the judge's statement contradicts itself. But this paradox reveals a deeper flaw in how we think about knowledge and surprise. The key lies in the prisoner's assumption that he can predict the execution by ruling out days. While his logic is internally consistent, it fails to account for the very nature of surprise. Let's break it down. The judge's promise has two parts. First, the prisoner will be hanged next week. Second, the hanging will come as a surprise. The prisoner's mistake is in treating these two conditions as if they are entirely separate. By trying to outsmart the judge, the prisoner convinces himself that the hanging can't happen at all. But this very conclusion ensures that when the execution does occur, on a day he ruled out, it will indeed be a surprise, fulfilling the judge's promise. The unexpected hanging paradox challenges our understanding of logical reasoning and prediction. It highlights the limits of deductive reasoning, especially when applied to situations involving surprise or uncertainty. The prisoner's logic works only if he assumes that his deductions can't be wrong. But the paradox exposes how his own reasoning creates the conditions for the judge's statement to hold true. This paradox has fascinated logicians because it raises profound questions about the nature of self-referential statements and the relationship between knowledge and uncertainty. It's similar to other paradoxes, like the liar paradox, where a statement like, "this sentence is false," creates a loop of contradiction. In the unexpected hanging paradox, the prisoner's reasoning becomes self-referential. He uses his predictions to try to avoid the surprise, but those very predictions ensure the surprise happens. Philosophers have debated the deeper implications of this paradox for decades. One interpretation is that it reveals the limits of human reasoning. Our logical systems rely on clear rules and assumptions, but the unexpected hanging paradox shows that even the most rigorous reasoning can break down when it encounters uncertainty or self-reference. It forces us to confront the possibility that some aspects of reality might be fundamentally unpredictable. The paradox also has connections to game theory and decision-making. In game theory, players often try to anticipate their opponent's moves. But the unexpected hanging paradox shows how overthinking and second-guessing can backfire. By trying to predict the execution, the prisoner inadvertently ensures its success. This has parallels in real life, where attempts to outsmart systems or predict outcomes can lead to unintended consequences. But the paradox isn't just a puzzle for philosophers. It has practical implications for how we think about surprise, uncertainty, and planning. It reminds us that not everything can be predicted or controlled, no matter how much we analyze or prepare. In a world filled with uncertainty, the unexpected hanging paradox teaches us to embrace the unexpected and recognize the limits of our knowledge. What's particularly striking about this paradox is its ability to create tension between logic and intuition. On the surface, the prisoner's reasoning feels flawless. Yet the moment the execution happens, we realize the flaw in his thinking. This tension between expectation and reality is what makes the paradox so compelling and so deeply unsettling. The unexpected hanging paradox forces us to confront one of life's greatest mysteries, the nature of the unknown. It challenges us to think critically about how we approach uncertainty and reminds us that even the most carefully constructed plans can be upended by the unexpected. And perhaps that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that sometimes, the only certainty is surprise itself. Stockdale Paradox. Imagine enduring years of unimaginable suffering and coming out not just intact but stronger. How would you do it? This is the heart of the Stockdale Paradox, a concept that reveals the delicate balance between hope and brutal realism. Named after Admiral James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy officer and prisoner of war in Vietnam, this paradox challenges conventional wisdom about optimism, resilience, and survival. The Stockdale Paradox originates from Stockdale's harrowing experience as a POW during the Vietnam War. For 8 years, he endured brutal torture, isolation, and uncertainty. Many of his fellow prisoners didn't survive, succumbing to despair or broken spirits, but Stockdale did. And when asked how, his response revealed a paradox that has since inspired leaders, psychologists, and thinkers alike. The optimists, Stockdale said, were the ones who didn't make it. They were the ones who said, "We'll be out by Christmas," and Christmas would come, and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, "We'll be out by Easter," and Easter would come, and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. Stockdale explained that survival wasn't about blind optimism or wishful thinking. It was about holding two seemingly contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time. Unwavering faith that you will prevail in the end and the discipline to confront the brutal facts of your current reality. This is the Stockdale Paradox, the ability to balance hope with realism, to maintain faith in the future while not denying the challenges of the present. It's a paradox because it goes against what we often think of as positive thinking. Blind optimism can lead to disillusionment when reality fails to meet expectations, but at the same time, losing hope entirely can be equally destructive. The paradox lies in finding the equilibrium between these two extremes. Let's explore why this mindset is so powerful. On one hand, having faith in a better future gives you the motivation to keep going. Without hope, despair takes over, making it difficult to endure hardship. But on the other hand, denying the harshness of your circumstances can leave you unprepared for the challenges ahead. By embracing the brutal facts of your situation, you build resilience and develop strategies to survive, even if those strategies are painful or difficult. The Stockdale paradox shows us that hope and realism aren't opposites, they're complementary forces. In Stockdale's case, this paradox played out in a literal life and death scenario, but its lessons extend far beyond the battlefield. In business, relationships, and personal growth, the Stockdale paradox teaches us how to navigate adversity. For example, in the face of a failing project, blind optimism might lead you to ignore warning signs and press on without a plan, while pure pessimism might cause you to give up entirely. The Stockdale paradox suggests a third path, acknowledging the challenges while maintaining faith in your ability to find a solution. This mindset is particularly relevant in times of crisis, whether it's a global pandemic, an economic downturn, or a personal struggle. When the future feels uncertain, it's tempting to either cling to false hope or sink into despair. The Stockdale paradox reminds us to do neither. Instead, it calls us to face the reality of our circumstances head-on while holding on to the belief that we can overcome them. Psychologists have found that this approach aligns with the concept of adaptive resilience. Resilient people don't deny the difficulties they face, but they also don't let those difficulties define them. They adapt, finding ways to grow and persevere even in the darkest times. The Stockdale paradox captures this balance perfectly, showing that resilience isn't about avoiding pain, it's about enduring it with purpose. The paradox also highlights the dangers of false hope. Stockdale's fellow prisoners who clung to unrealistic timelines were devastated when those timelines came and went. Their misplaced optimism left them unprepared for the long haul. This doesn't mean we should avoid hope altogether, it means we need to ground our hope in reality. Hope that is tethered to a clear-eyed view of the situation becomes a source of strength, not weakness. But the Stockdale paradox isn't just about surviving adversity, it's about thriving through it. Stockdale didn't just endure his time as a prisoner of war, he emerged from it with a deeper understanding of himself and the world. He found meaning in his suffering, using it to grow and to inspire others. This is a crucial part of the paradox, the idea that even in the darkest moments, we can find purpose and meaning that carry us forward. So how can we apply the Stockdale paradox to our own lives? First, we need to practice radical honesty about our circumstances. This means confronting the facts, no matter how uncomfortable they are. Denial might feel easier in the short term, but it leaves us vulnerable in the long run. Second, we need to cultivate a deep and abiding faith in our ability to overcome challenges. This isn't blind optimism, it's a belief rooted in the knowledge that we are capable of enduring and adapting. The Stockdale paradox also calls us to develop emotional flexibility. It's not about suppressing fear or despair but about allowing those emotions to coexist with hope and determination. This balance requires self-awareness and reflection, as well as a willingness to embrace discomfort as part of the journey. In the end, the Stockdale paradox isn't just a lesson in survival, it's a blueprint for living a meaningful life. It teaches us that the human spirit is capable of incredible resilience when we balance hope with realism, faith with action, and optimism with pragmatism. It reminds us that even in the face of immense suffering, we can find strength, purpose, and growth. So the next time you face a challenge that feels overwhelming, remember the wisdom of Admiral Stockdale. Hold on to the belief that you will prevail, but never shy away from confronting the truth of your situation. Because in that delicate balance lies the power to not just survive but to thrive. And that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that hope and honesty together are the keys to enduring life's greatest tests. Paradox of enrichment. You're running a wildlife reserve, and your goal is to protect a predator-prey relationship. You decide to enrich the prey population, make the habitat better, provide more food, ensure their numbers grow. You'd expect this to strengthen the ecosystem, right? But instead, disaster strikes. The predator population skyrockets, they overconsume the prey, and the entire system collapses. This is the paradox of enrichment, a concept from ecology that reveals how attempts to improve a system can unintentionally destabilize it. The paradox, first introduced by ecologist Michael Rosenzweig in 1971, describes how increasing the food supply for prey species can lead to ecological collapse. At its heart, it's a counterintuitive lesson about balance, sustainability, and unintended consequences. While it originates in ecology, its implications extend far beyond the natural world, offering profound insights into economics, human behavior, and the systems we rely on. Here's how the paradox of enrichment works in nature. Imagine a simple predator-prey system, rabbits and foxes. If you introduce more food for the rabbits, lush grass, better conditions, you might expect the rabbit population to thrive, providing a stable and plentiful food source for the foxes. But in reality, the opposite often happens. The rabbits multiply rapidly, and the foxes take advantage of this abundance to increase their numbers as well. The problem is that the foxes grow too numerous, consuming rabbits faster than they can reproduce. Eventually, the rabbit population crashes, and with no food left, the foxes crash too. What started as an effort to strengthen the ecosystem ends in its collapse. The paradox highlights the delicate balance that ecosystems depend on. Predators and prey are locked in a dynamic relationship, each influencing the other's population. By enriching the system beyond its natural equilibrium, we unintentionally create instability. It's a stark reminder that nature doesn't always respond to intervention the way we expect. But the paradox of enrichment isn't just an ecological curiosity, it's a broader metaphor for how well-intentioned efforts can backfire in complex systems. Take economics, for example. Imagine a government trying to stimulate growth by flooding the market with resources, subsidies or incentives. At first, the economy booms, but soon imbalances emerge: overproduction, inflation, or resource depletion. Just like in an ecosystem, enrichment destabilizes the system. The paradox also appears in human behavior. Consider the idea of overindulgence. If you want to motivate a team or encourage a child, you might think providing more rewards, more praise, more treats would increase their performance. But too much enrichment can lead to complacency or dependency, undermining the very goal you set out to achieve. The lesson here is clear: more isn't always better. Sometimes, striving for improvement without understanding the underlying system can lead to unintended harm. In a world of progress, the paradox of enrichment serves as a cautionary tale. It challenges the assumption that adding more to a system will always make it stronger. Instead, it urges us to think critically about balance, sustainability, and the unintended consequences of intervention. The paradox also raises profound philosophical questions about human interaction with the natural world. In our efforts to control and improve ecosystems, economies, and societies, how often do we disrupt the very systems we're trying to protect? The paradox of enrichment invites us to reflect on our role as stewards of the planet and to consider the limits of our understanding. It reminds us that complexity requires humility and that even the best intentions can lead to unforeseen outcomes. One way to address the paradox is to focus on resilience rather than enrichment. Instead of trying to maximize a single element of a system, like prey populations or economic output, we can work to maintain the system's overall stability. In ecology, this might mean protecting biodiversity and natural habitats rather than artificially boosting one species. In human systems, it could mean prioritizing long-term sustainability over short-term gains. The paradox of enrichment also teaches us to embrace uncertainty. Complex systems, whether ecosystems, economies, or societies, are full of interdependencies that we can't always predict. By recognizing these complexities, we can approach problems with a mindset of curiosity and caution, avoiding the pitfalls of overconfidence and oversimplification. Ultimately, the paradox of enrichment isn't just about nature, it's about the interconnectedness of all systems. It shows us that even small changes can have ripple effects and that our actions, no matter how well-meaning, can produce unintended consequences. It challenges us to think critically, act thoughtfully, and respect the delicate balances that sustain life on Earth. So the next time you're faced with a problem, whether it's ecological, economic, or personal, remember the lesson of the paradox of enrichment. Sometimes, the best way to strengthen a system isn't to add more to it, but to understand what makes it stable in the first place. Because in the end, true enrichment comes not from overloading a system, but from honoring its complexity and finding harmony within it. Simpson's paradox. You're deciding on a treatment for a disease. You're told treatment A has a higher success rate than treatment B, so you confidently choose treatment A. But later, you learn that when you break the data into subgroups, say, younger and older patients, treatment B actually performs better in both groups. How can treatment B be better in every subgroup, but treatment A still has a higher overall success rate? This is Simpson's paradox, a statistical phenomenon that defies intuition and reveals the surprising ways data can mislead us. At its core, Simpson's paradox occurs when trends that appear in different groups of data disappear or even reverse when the groups are combined. It's a paradox that challenges our understanding of statistics and forces us to rethink how we interpret information. To make this clearer, let's dive into an example. Imagine a university that is evaluating its admission rates for male and female applicants. The data shows that overall, a higher percentage of male applicants were admitted compared to female applicants, suggesting potential gender bias. But when you break the data down by departments, you discover that each department actually admitted a higher percentage of female applicants than male applicants. How is this possible? The answer lies in the composition of the data. In this scenario, the paradox occurs because women apply disproportionately to highly competitive departments with low admission rates, while men applied more often to less competitive departments with higher admission rates. When the data is aggregated, these differences skew the overall results, creating the illusion of bias against women, even though no such bias exists within individual departments. This paradox is a reminder of the dangers of oversimplifying data. It highlights the importance of context and shows how combining or aggregating data can mask important details. In the example of the university admissions, the overall numbers told one story, but the departmental breakdown told a very different one. Simpson's paradox teaches us that the way we group and analyze data can fundamentally change the conclusions we draw. The implications of Simpson's paradox go far beyond hypothetical examples. It appears in real-world scenarios across a wide range of fields, from medicine and social science to sports and public policy. For instance, in clinical trials, a treatment might seem effective when the results are aggregated but turn out to be less effective or even harmful when analyzed for specific subgroups, such as age or gender. In politics, aggregated voting data can suggest trends that don't hold true within individual demographics. Even in business, marketing campaigns or product evaluations can be misleading if the data isn't analyzed carefully. The paradox also raises deeper questions about causality and decision-making. When faced with contradictory patterns in data, how do we determine which perspective is correct? Should we focus on the overall trend, or should we prioritize the subgroup analysis? The answer often depends on the context and the questions we're trying to answer. Simpson's paradox reminds us that data doesn't speak for itself, it requires interpretation, and that interpretation can be influenced by how the data is presented and understood. One of the most important lessons of Simpson's paradox is the need for critical thinking and careful analysis. In a world increasingly driven by data, it's easy to take numbers at face value, especially when they confirm our assumptions or fit a compelling narrative. But Simpson's paradox shows that data can be more complex than it appears, and that even seemingly straightforward statistics can be deceptive. This paradox also has profound implications for how we communicate data. Misleading interpretations of data can have serious consequences, from flawed medical decisions to misguided policies. Understanding Simpson's paradox can help us become more discerning consumers of information, better equipped to ask the right questions and challenge misleading conclusions. Simpson's paradox also reminds us of the importance of transparency in data analysis. When presenting data, it's essential to provide enough context and detail to allow others to understand how the data was collected, grouped, and analyzed. Aggregated results can be useful, but they should always be accompanied by a breakdown of subgroups to avoid oversimplification and misinterpretation. Philosophically, Simpson's paradox challenges us to think about the nature of truth and perception. It reveals how different perspectives on the same data can lead to conflicting conclusions, forcing us to grapple with the idea that truth is often more nuanced than we'd like to believe. It's a paradox that invites us to embrace complexity and to question our assumptions about the way the world works. In the end, Simpson's paradox isn't just a quirk of statistics, it's a powerful reminder of the importance of context, critical thinking, and curiosity. It teaches us to look beyond the surface, to dig deeper into the data, and to approach information with a healthy dose of skepticism. And in a world where data increasingly shapes our decisions, that lesson might just be one of the most life-changing paradoxes of all. Stockdale Paradox. Imagine enduring years of unimaginable suffering and coming out not just intact but stronger. How would you do it? This is the heart of the Stockdale Paradox, a concept that reveals the delicate balance between hope and brutal realism. Named after Admiral James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy officer and prisoner of war in Vietnam, this paradox challenges conventional wisdom about optimism, resilience, and survival. The Stockdale Paradox originates from Stockdale's harrowing experience as a POW during the Vietnam War. For 8 years, he endured brutal torture, isolation, and uncertainty. Many of his fellow prisoners didn't survive, succumbing to despair or broken spirits, but Stockdale did. And when asked how, his response revealed a paradox that has since inspired leaders, psychologists, and thinkers alike. The optimists, Stockdale said, were the ones who didn't make it. They were the ones who said, "We'll be out by Christmas," and Christmas would come, and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, "We'll be out by Easter," and Easter would come, and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. Stockdale explained that survival wasn't about blind optimism or wishful thinking. It was about holding two seemingly contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time. Unwavering faith that you will prevail in the end and the discipline to confront the brutal facts of your current reality. This is the Stockdale Paradox, the ability to balance hope with realism, to maintain faith in the future while not denying the challenges of the present. It's a paradox because it goes against what we often think of as positive thinking. Blind optimism can lead to disillusionment when reality fails to meet expectations, but at the same time, losing hope entirely can be equally destructive. The paradox lies in finding the equilibrium between these two extremes. Let's explore why this mindset is so powerful. On one hand, having faith in a better future gives you the motivation to keep going. Without hope, despair takes over, making it difficult to endure hardship. But on the other hand, denying the harshness of your circumstances can leave you unprepared for the challenges ahead. By embracing the brutal facts of your situation, you build resilience and develop strategies to survive, even if those strategies are painful or difficult. The Stockdale Paradox shows us that hope and realism aren't opposites, they're complementary forces. In Stockdale's case, this paradox played out in a literal life and death scenario, but its lessons extend far beyond the battlefield. In business, relationships, and personal growth, the Stockdale Paradox teaches us how to navigate adversity. For example, in the face of a failing project, blind optimism might lead you to ignore warning signs and press on without a plan, while pure pessimism might cause you to give up entirely. The Stockdale Paradox suggests a third path, acknowledging the challenges while maintaining faith in your ability to find a solution. This mindset is particularly relevant in times of crisis, whether it's a global pandemic, an economic downturn, or a personal struggle. When the future feels uncertain, it's tempting to either cling to false hope or sink into despair. The Stockdale Paradox reminds us to do neither. Instead, it calls us to face the reality of our circumstances head-on while holding on to the belief that we can overcome them. Psychologists have found that this approach aligns with the concept of adaptive resilience. Resilient people don't deny the difficulties they face, but they also don't let those difficulties define them. They adapt, finding ways to grow and persevere even in the darkest times. The Stockdale Paradox captures this balance perfectly, showing that resilience isn't about avoiding pain, it's about enduring it with purpose. The paradox also highlights the dangers of false hope. Stockdale's fellow prisoners who clung to unrealistic timelines were devastated when those timelines came and went. Their misplaced optimism left them unprepared for the long haul. This doesn't mean we should avoid hope altogether, it means we need to ground our hope in reality. Hope that is tethered to a clear-eyed view of the situation becomes a source of strength, not weakness. But the Stockdale paradox isn't just about surviving adversity, it's about thriving through it. Stockdale didn't just endure his time as a prisoner of war, he emerged from it with a deeper understanding of himself and the world. He found meaning in his suffering, using it to grow and to inspire others. This is a crucial part of the paradox, the idea that even in the darkest moments, we can find purpose and meaning that carry us forward. So how can we apply the Stockdale paradox to our own lives? First, we need to practice radical honesty about our circumstances. This means confronting the facts, no matter how uncomfortable they are. Denial might feel easier in the short term, but it leaves us vulnerable in the long run. Second, we need to cultivate a deep and abiding faith in our ability to overcome challenges. This isn't blind optimism, it's a belief rooted in the knowledge that we are capable of enduring and adapting. The Stockdale paradox also calls us to develop emotional flexibility. It's not about suppressing fear or despair but about allowing those emotions to coexist with hope and determination. This balance requires self-awareness and reflection, as well as a willingness to embrace discomfort as part of the journey. In the end, the Stockdale paradox isn't just a lesson in survival, it's a blueprint for living a meaningful life. It teaches us that the human spirit is capable of incredible resilience when we balance hope with realism, faith with action, and optimism with pragmatism. It reminds us that even in the face of immense suffering, we can find strength, purpose, and growth. So the next time you face a challenge that feels overwhelming, remember the wisdom of Admiral Stockdale. Hold on to the belief that you will prevail, but never shy away from confronting the truth of your situation. Because in that delicate balance lies the power to not just survive but to thrive. And that's the paradox's greatest lesson, that hope and honesty together are the keys to enduring life's greatest tests.